Bookworms, and welcome to Bad Book Club, where I, Jade, a silly goose with an English degree, read classic and popular literature so you don't have to. Happy Halloween, Bookworms! In our final episode, we are going to summarize part 5, and then I can finally discuss the full It with you. I'm so excited, so let's just jump in right away. Let's go. Part 5 is entitled The Ritual of Jade. Do you remember what Jade is? I don't know if I told you or not, but Ben, when he was telling everyone about the smoke hole, also mentioned something called the Ritual of Jade, where if Indians wanted to vanquish a spirit, they would bite the spirit's tongue and then they would tell it a joke, and if it laughed, it would leave. So that's what this is named after. It's 1985 and the adults are still in the library talking, but it's 1 a.m. now and Mike wants to go to bed, despite Eddie wanting to remember everything. They decide to meet in the Barrens, and they hope nothing bad happens before then. Mike says when they were young, there was always a good force protecting them. They realize that the cuts they made on their palms as children after defeating it are open and bleeding. They join hands again, and the library is put into chaos, doors slamming, books falling over. It stops, and Bill comforts Beverly. They walk home together, and Beverly tells Bill about how after their fight with it, that it possessed her father. In 1958, she had gotten home, and it was in her father, and he threw her across the room, told her he knew she was hanging out with those boys, and to disrobe so he could examine what they've done to her. He kicks her, and Beverly understands that it has increased the thoughts that were already in his head. He hits her again and stares at her chest. She asks who told him about the boys, the smoking, if it was a clown, and he tries to punch her. She runs, and he chases her across town. She hides under a dumpster, but he finds her, and she runs again and is able to lose him. She decides to hide in their clubhouse. Unfortunately, Henry, Victor, and Belch are following her. Voices from the moon say to Henry that he needs to kill Beverly Marsh. 1985, adult Mike starts to clean the library and journal about what's happened. And he hears footsteps. Henry Bowers steps out of the dark and tells Mike about the voices, Victor, how he killed the man who drove him here, and how it gave him clothes and a knife. They fight, and Mike tries not to kill him. He stabs Henry's arm, and Henry stabs Mike's thigh. Stanley Uris's head pops up and says he should kill Mike, and Henry charges. Mike is forced to stab Henry in the stomach, and Henry runs away. Mike calls the hospital, but Pennywise answers and says that he's dead. Mike ties a tourniquet around his leg and tells the phone where he is. 1958, back in the day, Henry grabs Beverly by her hair, and a woman in a car tries to help, but Henry kicks out her taillights, dragging Beverly behind him. She kicks him in the crotch and runs away. 1985. This chapter is going to be a lot of switching, just warning. 1985. Beverly and Bill go back to their hotel, and Beverly misses Kay's message because she goes to Bill's room. They sleep together, and Beverly remembers sleeping with all the boys. Beverly dreams that night. In her dream, it's 1958, and she's running to the clubhouse, and Bill isn't there, but Ben is, and they hide. The bullies don't find them, and they realize that it is using Henry. They leave. The boys go to the river, and Henry listens to the Morlock holes who tell him something. 1985, Henry is hiding, bleeding from the stomach, and remembers that day. He had found the knife in his mailbox with balloons and kids' faces on it. He goes inside the house and listens to the moon and stabs his father in the throat while he's sleeping. 1985, Henry gets into a car, the kind his dad always wanted, with Belch Huggins, who's dead. Henry remembers the day in 1958 watching Ben and Beverly when Frankenstein suddenly appeared. Henry peed his pants and it lurched at Belch. 1985. In the glove box, Henry finds whiskey and the room numbers of each of the losers. He goes to the top floor of the hotel and knocks on Eddie's door. Henry forces his way in but drops the knife. Eddie cuts his face with a broken bottle and he stabs him as Henry attacks and kills him. 1958, Bill, Richie, and Eddie see Ben and Beverly come running toward them. They go to the Barrens since it is theirs. Bill argues that there's no safe place because Derry is it. The bullies throw rocks at them and they run to the pumping station where they know it lives. They go down the pipes and attack Henry when he tries to follow. They form a line and they go to where Bill's brother died. In the next chapter, it's 1985, and Tom is dreaming of killing his father, then following Beverly and some kids down a long pipe with his friends and a creature with balloons. He wants to kill her. He wakes up and thinks he has to go down there, but doesn't know where that is. A balloon with an arrow appears in his bathroom, pointing at the door. A voice from the balloon explains things to him. Audra is dreaming too, that she is someone named Beverly in a pipe with young Bill. She thinks she hears a giggle, but she decides that she needs to see Bill anyway, despite this scary giggle that woke her up. She tries to call his room and there's no answer, but she's told that he did just receive a phone call. She hears another voice in the bathroom saying that they'll all float, and her TV turns on to Pennywise. She runs outside to her car, where Tom puts a hand on her shoulder. Bill and Beverly go to Eddie's room and splint his arm, because Henry broke it. They call Ben and Richie. She calls Mike and learns that he's been hurt and taken to the hospital. They call the hospital and learn that Mike is in grave condition. They drive, and Bill and Richie hear Pennywise taunting them in their heads, Bill in his head and Richie through the radio. They go to the Barrens, and then they find the Morlock hole where they went down to the Barrens originally. Bill finds Audra's purse, and he's distraught. They go down anyway. In the next chapter, we learn there are only two things. Before the universe was created, there was only two things. It and the turtle. It arrived after the turtle, and it was scared of the kids. It's 1958, and Eddie tells them where to go to get to the center of town since he has a natural compass. They go through one pipe and light one of their 10 matches and see a dead body, the body of Patrick Hawksetter. Henry yells after them, but then there's a shriek. They crawl past Patrick. It's 1985, and Audra is in its deadlights, quote unquote. Tom saw it and dropped dead, and Audra realized it is female and is now in the its web. It is in its own point of view telling us these things. The losers look haggard. They find the bodies of Belch and Victor, and Bill thinks Audra is also dead. Eddie leads them. He remembers the drop and lights a match and sees his wife's wedding ring on the ground, which he picks up. In 1958, they're a quarter-mile down, slithering through pipes. They hear Henry behind them once again. Richie suddenly sees a giant eye and a tentacle wraps around Bev's ear. Ben yanks her and it pulls away some of her ear. They punch the eye, Eddie screaming that it's just an eye, and they move on. The giant bird flies down from the rafters of this pipe, I guess, and attacks Eddie. Mike cuts its talon with a knife, and they see a door, and they each see a different symbol on the door. They open the door and walk through to the land of it. It's 1985, the losers are walking, and Bev thinking she married her father. Tom is just like him. They get in a circle. Bev remembers how they fought it with Chewed. Bill lights a match and sees his brother's dead body, silver eyes, saying it was Bill's fault. It grabs Bill, and he yells the tongue twister. It thrusts its fists against the post and still insists it sees the ghost, in a voice not his own, because whenever he uses a voice that's not his, he doesn't stutter. It cringes away, and Bill attacks it. The clocks don't ring. In Derry, by the way, in an above-ground world, the clocks don't ring, and it starts to rain very hard. Mike Hanlon wakes up. A nurse tries to put him to sleep when he calls for help. Bill senses something is wrong with Mike, and they hold hands to lend power to him. Mike feels his power and smashes a pitcher in the nurse's face. They come to the door once again. Each see another different symbol. A nightmarish spider starts to crawl down its web. They see it and it's terrible, and they realize that it is a spider in their brains because that's what they can comprehend it as, and it's also pregnant and has an egg sac, which Stan was aware of, and that's why he didn't come. Ben sees lights behind its eyes, a sort of dead light. In 1958, a spider also crawls down its web. Bill walks to it and tells it that it killed his brother. He says he will kill it, and it tells him that she is the eater of worlds. He repeats the rhyme to the spider. He senses the turtle, which overwhelms it. The turtle says he can't help, and Bill senses another power that created both the eater and the watcher. The turtle says there is Chewed. Bill mentally bites its tongue. Bill chants the rhyme as Bill flies through the dark, and the spiderweb collapses. They all run out, assuming that it has been killed. In 1985, Bill says it killed his brother once again, and this time he won't leave without making sure it's dead. Richie sees Audra and Tom hanging in its web. Tom definitely dead. It says that the turtle is dead and tries to kill Bill's physical body while Bill is distracted mentally. Richie does his Irish voice and the spider laughs. Richie laughs and bites the spider's tongue in his brain harder. Eddie watches as Richie and the spider stare at each other and Bill bleeds and twitches on the ground. Eddie charges at it. Eddie's aspirator calls Bill back when he does a little puff of air in its eyes, and it rips Eddie's arm off. Eddie says, "Don't call me Eds," to Richie, and then dies. Beverly goes to comfort him. Above ground in Derry, wind and lightning are striking all through town. The Irish cop that they know from their childhood has a stroke and dies. The sewers reverse, and explosions rock the bank. In 1958, they're crawling back, and Bill feels that their bond as friends is breaking. Beverly says that she knows how to solidify the bond and be more than just children. She begins to undress. In 1985, Bill chases it, leaving Audra behind. They stomp on its eggs, he and Richie. Beverly sits with Eddie and remembers how she had let each of the losers have sex with her so that they would all be bonded together. And then they went home. In 1985, though, there's been the first big flood since 1958. The standpipe falls. Bill and Richie are staring at it, and Bill attacks it. He pushes his arm into its eye and keeps going and hears the sound of its heartbeat. His hand finds the heart, and he squeezes it until it erupts. And it has died. A voice tells him that he did well. He can't find Richie, though, and in a panic, he runs out. Paul Bunyan's statue falls in Derry, windows shatter, and the kissing bridge breaks. Bill and Ben find Richie and wake him. They get Beverly and Audra, and they leave, saying that Eddie belongs to it now, in this area. He belongs here. The mark on the door is gone now for all of them. There's no mark anymore. Above in Derry, the glass corridor of the library explodes. The storm killed 67 people and injured 320. In the sewers, the water is rising, and Bill is worried they might have to float Audra. The theater has caved into the sewers, and they're swimming through the water now. They come up out of the street, and Bill actually sees the sister of his old babysitter, and it's comforting to him. While they're getting out of the sewers, a photographer takes a photo of them that is named Survivors. The rain suddenly stops. Richie calls an ambulance for Audra. Bill says that he'll never sleep again, and they see a kid running through the street with a paper boat. It's 1958, and they come up out of the Morlock hole, or the sewers, and Stan breaks a Coke bottle. At first, it looks like he's going to cut his wrists, but instead, he cuts his hands, and Bill is worried about him. They all cut their hands and stand in a circle. They all agree that if anything ever happens again, that they'll come back to Derry. Ben leaves the circle first, and Bill last, and that's the last we see of any of them until they come back 27 years later. Bill decides that he never wants to play in the Barrens again. In the final interlude, Bill gives Mike his notebook in the hospital. Bill's stutter is gone, but he looks older. Audra is still catatonic. Physically, she's fine, but emotionally, she hasn't said anything or noticed anything. Richie flew back to LA that morning, and Bill thinks they'll all start to forget each other again. Ben invited Beverly to go back with him to Nebraska, and she agreed. Bill says he's already forgetting things, and he starts to think of this whole event as the Billy Goat's Gruff. Bill kisses Mike's cheek. Ben and Beverly come in to say goodbye to Mike, and they look very lovey-dovey, and Mike thinks they'll probably get together. Since Mike is forgetting too, he assumes that they did kill it because there isn't a watchman needed anymore. So he assumes that it's definitely dead. After a while, there's still no change in Audra, and Bill and her stay at Mike's place since Mike is in the hospital. Mike and Bill are already starting to forget all of the other people and each other. The police chief is randomly killed by something called the tramp chair from olden days. It falls through the ceiling and hits his head. Bill and Mike start to forget Eddie's last name. Mike tries to call Ben, but the number doesn't work and the letters are starting to disappear off the page. Bill calls Mike and tells him that he has an idea to try and fix Audra, and Mike tells him he better try it fast. Only Mike and Bill remember each other now. Bill puts Audra on Silver. He shouts, "Hi-yo, Silver, away," and they ride to beat the devil, he says. They almost crash, and Audra awakes. She remembers nothing, but she says, "What happened?" Bill says he'll write about this, but never will, because he can't remember anything. And that's it. That's the end of It. Okay, friends, I've got some stuff to say. So, here's the thing. I read this book knowing that a lot of people are super huge fans of Stephen King. And this is my first Stephen King novel other than his book on writing, which was pretty well done. Here's the thing, don't be mad. I really did not like this book. If you did, I totally understand why. I really do. Stephen King is a vivid storyteller. His writing is very impressive. His ability to set a tone and mood are like frighteningly strong. And that's key to horror books, in my opinion. So if you like Stephen King, if you liked this book, I get it. But for me, there were some things that kept popping up that really ruined my enjoyment of the book. And I'll start with what I didn't like so that we can end on a high note and talk about some themes and what I did like, okay? So personally, like I said, there were a couple things that really brought me out of the story. And this is all a matter of opinion. If you're a Stephen King fan, more power to you. These are just my impressions. So the very first one that I noticed from the very beginning was that he has a somewhat overly grotesque manner of descriptions. Stephen King, like I said, is brilliant at tone, and he does this with like scary stories, keywords, and similes. He uses a lot of similes in this book, which is totally cool. But I don't know if it's because it's a horror book or what, but sometimes those scary similes reached past the line for me into the ridiculous. For most of the book, I'd be reading along at a good pace, and then just one sentence, perhaps like a gross, overly intimate sentence, would pop up and just completely take me out of it. These were prominent in sex scenes especially, and as well just like through the rest of the book. I felt like I just couldn't get away from them. And it was usually just small sentences that made me say, ew. And I don't know if this was on purpose to create like an uneasy tone, or I don't know, but it always felt out of place to me because I feel like they came out of nowhere. I literally considered doing a blooper episode where I would just list the most uncomfortable sentences in this book, but they're so uncomfortable that I don't even really want to say them because like my family listens to this podcast. But I do have a couple of examples. Let me pull one up. Okay, so for example, there's one scene where Stan Uvers's wife Patty is explaining how they want children, but occasionally they would try and she would still get her period, and she says that she would be looking at the box of Stay Free pads, thinking that the box looked almost smugged, seeming almost to be saying, "Hello, Patty, we are your children. We are the only children you will ever have, and we are hungry. Nurse us on blood." And I don't know about you guys, but like that sentence came out of nowhere, and the whole nursing us on blood bit, I was unprepared for that. And it wasn't scary to me. It just came across as silly. And there are lots of sentences where like he makes a simile for hair. Like there's a moment where one of the kids says someone's hair looks like his father's pubic hair. And I went, what? What are you talking about? And so it's odd moments that feel way too intimate and like strangely grotesque. And maybe that's on purpose, like I said, but it just didn't do it for me. I felt like they really took me out of it because I'd be reading and then I'd read something like that and I'd be like, what? And it would make me pause. And if it makes me pause, then I'm taken out of the story. So I personally just it wasn't for me. Second, the structure, in my opinion, it's a little too structured. So like I said, Stephen King writes this book with parts, chapters, and scenes. And I almost wish he wouldn't do that because I feel like I like books we've talked about before where the chapters are fairly short because it makes me feel like I'm making a lot of progress. With Stephen King novel, it almost felt like I was making no progress because I'd be on scene 12 in chapter 2. Why not just make them chapters? I understand because it was so structured that each chapter had like a theme that he was going for, and I get that, but it almost felt like someone was hitting me over the head with all this like information. It was almost too correct. I feel like the story just as a whole, I can tell it to you in the 5 parts. I mean, the first part is they get calls. The second part is they remember being kids. The third part is the grown-ups coming together, still remembering being kids. The fourth bit is still remembering being kids. And the fifth is kids and grown-ups defeat it. And so as you can see, like the parts are so clearly marked. And I felt almost like the structure was so not, maybe it's just me, I'm pretty good at guessing what's going to happen in books. And I knew from part 1 exactly where the rest of the story would be going, and just because of the way it was like arranged. So it was a little sad to me because when I open a book, I like to really not know anything. Like I didn't even read the back cover before I opened it. I really like to throw myself in it. And so to read part 1 and know that I knew exactly what was going to happen in the rest of the book because of the way it's organized was a little disappointing. Like I knew every like chapter would start in part 2 with them, the adults being like in italics telling me where they are and then flashing back to being kids. And reading that 6 times is tiring. Sorry, the person just honked outside. But reading that 6 times, it's just tiring for me and it feels repetitive. And so I felt like I wasn't making a lot of progress. Now, I'm sure that some readers would really enjoy that structure because they know what to expect, but I just like to be surprised. So personally, for me as a reader, it didn't work. If it works for you, I totally get it. It just didn't work for me. 3, for me, some of the suspense and foreshadowing was a little bit overdone, in my opinion. Just like, for example, Beverly walks to the dump and she sees a fridge and she's like, oh, what an interesting fridge. And I'm like, well, obviously that fridge is going to come into play later. So maybe this is that same problem where I'm pretty good at guessing storylines. But I felt like Stephen King often put in like emphasis and foreshadowing either too soon to the next event where it would be referenced, or it was too far away. So with the turtle is talked about the entire book, but only very occasionally. And from the very beginning, with a sentence that Stanley Uris says to his wife, he says, the turtle can't help us. And that's in part 1. And we don't see the turtle or hear about the turtle again. Like we do occasionally, they think they see a turtle here and there for the rest of the book. And then at the very end, we get the turtle. And I was like, I'm a little disappointed because you put this at the very beginning and you made me read 800 pages. And so my idea of the turtle would be that it was something very mysterious, something very cool. And we got there and the turtle was like fine. But I was like, if you're going to put it at the very beginning, I feel like the farther away you put something in foreshadowing, the higher expectations I'm going to have for it if it doesn't show up right away. So I personally felt like that was a little overdone for the turtle not being that much of a help. But that also might just be me. Maybe that like really kept readers reading. For me, it got annoying because the more I read about turtles, I was like, are we going to get to the point with the turtles? Because like there's been like occasional references and then it wasn't till the very end and then nothing really happened with the turtle. He was like, I can't help you, but you can use chewed if you want. And that was like it. So I can see what he was going for with that, which is if you raise questions, the reader will want them to be answered. But if you raise that question for me and you don't answer it till the end, I'm going to expect that answer to be pretty impressive. And it kind of wasn't, in my opinion. And like I said, like with the fridge, I felt like sometimes foreshadowing came just right beforehand. And for me, it's not foreshadowing if it happens right beforehand and you have to call my attention to it. They've been to the dump a number of times, and I wish that he had put in the fridge during one of those other times, because bringing it up now, I would have been like, oh yeah, they saw that fridge a long time ago. Like, that's cool that the storylines intersect that way, rather than her literally walking there and then that same day noticing he's standing at the fridge. It almost seems like it's too much of a coincidence. I can feel like the hand of the author there, you know? Just things like that. However, he does do some of that well. Like, I think it's very cool that Henry Bauer's friends get killed by Frankenstein. And then at the end, Henry Bauer's kind of turns into his own Frankenstein. Like, he's bleeding and gory and he looks dead and he's trying to kill people. Like, that foreshadowing of Frankenstein being his own sort of like death of his friends and then him becoming that is very cool. I like that a lot. So he did have it done well. It's just occasionally I thought that some of them were mistimed, but that's just me. Number 4. So this kind of ties into it. And the mystery this is super objective, but I personally found the plot to be a little overdone as well. So here's the thing. I don't read a lot of horror. So maybe this is just what horror is. But while I was reading, there are a couple chapters where it isn't even really there except through influence, where the most serious threat to the losers lives in Henry Bowers. And those chapters were the scariest in the entire book for me because I was the most gripped and interested. And I think this is because while Pennywise is spooky for me, he would sometimes cross into the ridiculous, because it's that same way that the sentences would almost go a step too far. So remember how Mike Hanlon woke up and there was a balloon left on his desk with a melting face on it? When I was reading it, I was like, oh my God, like he walked up and left a balloon. That is super scary. And then he woke up and he saw a picture of his face on it. And I was like, okay. And then he said the face was melting. And I was like, okay. And then it popped. And I was like, okay. I find with scary bits, he almost goes too far to explain himself. And I get the implication that Mike, like that balloon is a threat without having a face painted on it. Like that seems especially scary for me because mystery and not understanding something is very scary. Like a decapitated head in the fridge, like Stanley's decapitated head, very scary. But its mouth was full of feathers and then it started talking and then my brain was like, how is he talking around feathers? And I don't think that's what Stephen King wanted me to be thinking, but that's what I was thinking because you stuffed his mouth full of feathers. So it's almost like it's scary for me at first and then he goes just one step too far and I start to just wonder about it. Like I'm like, where is he getting these balloons with like people's faces on it? Like I'm like, did he paint it? Obviously not, but I'm like laughing to myself instead of taking it seriously. And that just might be me. Like maybe that's super scary, but I find that for me, what really scares me as a person is like not understanding something. And along that same vein, that's why I was a little disappointed whenever we learned how it came to the world and that it was an alien sort of being, because it almost was scarier to me before I learned that it's an actual creature that can be killed. It's scarier for it to be like the spirit of Derry that they can't kill that is like haunting them than it is to be an alien who like arrived here that they can kill. Like I just found that when you took that mystery away from me of like how it occurred and how it got here and that they know everything, that I felt like it was less scary. Like I feel like maybe it's almost like I can't suspend my disbelief that far. So I can suspend my disbelief enough to say like, oh, maybe there's a ghost haunting these kids, right? But when you say there's an alien and the alien's a spider and it's laying eggs, like I personally, I know this can't happen to me, so I'm not scared anymore. The idea of like a clown like appearing at a window, very scary. Like not that could happen, but like I wouldn't put it past that to happen to somebody somewhere. But then like, you know, like fighting a pregnant spider with its deadlights because it's an alien who came from like a what is it called? Not a crater, where it landed in a crater. Like that's not going to happen to me. So this is just my own personal preference of what I find scary, but personally the story just wasn't very scary for me, and I found it to be more like funny because I knew what was happening, but I could see how it would be scary for others. It just didn't work for me personally. Lastly, I think this one ties into my like 2 ones here at the end. Whoops. And lastly, this one ties into my 2 points here at the end, and I don't think that this book, in my opinion, ages very well. In case you didn't know, it was written in 1985. And I get that vibe, and I understand that it was written then for 2 reasons. And it's because of the racist tones and the sexist tones. Look, I'm not claiming, if you love Stephen King, please, I'm not claiming he's a sexist or racist person, but in 1985, I imagine he worried less about stereotypes in his mind. And from what I can tell, I looked into it and like people have talked about this before, and it seems like he's really improved on those choices as a writer. But this book, in my opinion, is a big hot mess of like racist and sexist choices. I don't even mean like the use of the N-word by Henry, who's a villain, so that makes sense, and it's the 50s, so like that tracks. I mostly mean like Richie's repeated use of what he calls like his pickaninny voice or the N-word Jim voice are especially cringy to me because he's a protagonist and he uses all these voices, but I think he uses that one the most. And every time he did it, I was like, oh my gosh, like that's just, it's a bit cringy. And there's some other choices, just like Mike Hanlon gets left behind. Like the lone black man of the group stays behind in Derry and all the rest of them get rich. Like that's a little sad. Like I can't quite pinpoint why that one doesn't sit well with me. I could be argued that that's not like a big deal, but it was a little sad when I read it. I was like, oh, poor Mike. Like why does he have to stay behind, you know? Like, so there's stuff like that. There's stuff like how they use like a sacred Indian ritual. You know, like, I don't know, like that was kind of, they mentioned, to be fair, he mentioned the tribes that do it. So that's kind of cool. Like, it seems like Ben actually put his research into it. But like, as a whole, this story kind of uses sacred Indian ritual to like tell me this story of like kids defeating an alien. So I don't know, like, it's kind of uncool just a little bit. Like I said, I can't quite tell. I could be convinced that it's not a problem, but like it feels kind of meh. It feels a little cringy to me. And then the one that really brought me out of my reading, that like would really distract me while I was reading, was the representation of women. I'm not even going to start on Beverly Marsh yet. Let's start with everyone's wives and mothers. None of them are good. The wives and mothers are evil. They let their fears get the best of them. They're pathetic and more. Eddie's wife isn't even real to me because she's written as like a heap of fat and tears for 2 pages, and then we never hear from her again. And did she not like wonder what happened to her husband? Like, what? Audra, for example, basically existed for one scene where her husband told her what was going on. Her husband then cheated on her, and then she had to be rescued, and then she was just comatose the whole time. Like she wasn't even like a person to me. Like I understand in a way that this book is supposed to be a critique of adulthood. So all adults are a little uncool, but the men actually do evil stuff while the women are just like manipulative, crying, stupid, or pathetic. Like the dads are scary, but moms are mostly annoying. And like Beverly Marsh is the other problem I had because like she was so close to being like a cool character, but she came across to me as like this aching ball of nerves, hair, and boobs. Like she's good at stuff, but for example, anytime she's described, I feel like she's described by her figure or outfit rather than her actions. The boys don't even really see her as real except for Ben and Bill. They just see her as like a hot girl. I don't remember what color her eyes are, but I can tell you that Stephen King used the word breast 46 times, tits 27 times, bosoms 5 times, and boobs 1 time, which makes for 79 mentions, with only 1 girl in the group. Not all of them reference Beverly. I mean, like, sometimes they reference Ben because he's a little bigger. But honestly, most of them are from Beverly. Most of them are. And for reference, with the 6 boys in this group, the word balls was said 27 times and penis 6. So in a story with 6 boys and 1 girl, I just find it so hard to believe that it's possible that like boy anatomy was referenced like 30-ish times and girls was mentioned nearly 80 times. And there's only 1 girl in the whole story who's their friend. And so I don't know, it was disappointing. I just kept reading the word breast and I was like, you can stop referencing her breasts because she's 12, or you could just stop because I understand that she's a woman. And the other thing too is like her physical abuse throughout the whole story. I mean, the thing is her father abuses her and physical abuse is like a big deal. But of the 7 losers with only 1 who gets beaten, why is it Beverly that had to be the kid who gets beaten? Like I could have easily have seen Stan Uris as that character, considering that he like is such like a articulate child. Like I could feel like his parents might like beat him. And to be fair, there are other characters that deal with abuse because like I said, this is kind of a critique on adults and like that kind of thing. So there are other characters like Henry and Eddie whose parents like abuse them. But of the losers, of the friend group, there are 7 of them. Only 1 has an abusive parent, and it's the woman, which is just kind of sad. I wish it hadn't have been her. I feel like it was the obvious choice, in my opinion. And the other problem, too, is that there are some references to her being a part of that problem. Like she somehow enjoys it or creates that issue with her husband and her father. And there are several sentences that say that she and her father were like making a smell during the summer together. And I really dislike the idea that women like to be hit without their consent. There's even stuff like how Tom will hit her, and then later when they have like sex, she would come a bunch of times. And I really don't like that idea that she likes to be abused. So I thought that was really gross. I didn't think that it was necessary. I thought it was gross that she was the only female and that was happening. And while she's a sharpshooter, for one, like she's the one that has that sharpshooter talent, she's otherwise completely useless in big fights, and she doesn't have a talent like the other boys have. So Ben is like good with architecture, and Bill is like the leader, and Eddie has like a compass, and Richie has the voices, and Beverly, she like shoots the best. That's like about it. Like it's not a part of her like person and character and personality like everyone else's is, and it's a little sad in my opinion because I wish that she had been a little bit more cool. And I don't know, I feel like she needs to constantly be saved. Her clothes are always being torn. And I mean, like, her scary moments aren't even as creative. So, like, the boys have werewolves or mummies, but for her, she just gets, like, sprayed with blood. Basically, I feel that Beverly is hypersexualized. I feel like she's treated as an object. And I feel like she's a stereotyped character that isn't on equal footing with the rest of the boys. Like, lastly, I just have to talk about this. My least favorite part. What is Beverly Marsh's talent, you ask? Why, sex, of course. I know she's only like 11/12, but now seems like a good time for you to have sex with all 6 boys in the group. And like, people call her a slut throughout the whole book, and she's not one since she's 12. And if she was, then it's still not okay to call her that. But in the end, why does this book's final moment have to be like having all of them having sex with Beverly? Like, book over, book done for me. I stopped reading. Beverly has no talent except having sex with all of them in a row in a not even grown body. I mean, there's only one female in this story, and he couldn't stop sex from coming up, and she's 12. So I was disappointed. Kay was the strongest woman character in my opinion, and I wish that she had called the cops on Tom, and she didn't, and that made me so sad. So sorry, you guys, I got fired up about that one. But that one just like personally made it really hard for me to read the book because I felt like I kept seeing like small things that were making me upset about Beverly's character. And I wish that she had been a little different or written differently. And let me repeat for the record, I am not telling you that you should feel this way or that Stephen King is sexist or racist. I honestly think he just didn't think about it that much. I mean, he wrote it in 1985. I'm sure his books have gotten much better since then. And maybe it's just this book too. Like, this is the only one I've read. So maybe this is the only one that's like a little problematic. But I mean, like, I have to just ask myself and maybe ask yourself, like, why even include some of those things? Like, was it necessary? Like, was it necessary for her to have sex with them to bind them all together when they cut themselves with a Coke bottle and, like, had a big blood oath 10 minutes later? Like, that couldn't have worked. We had to get, like, underage and, like, a little bit rapey. Like, it was a little too much for me, honestly. So anyway, if you find yourself upset with me, I'm really sorry. I am not saying that you have to feel this way. I just wanted to speak my mind because I felt this way. So each entitled to our own opinion. But let's move on to more interesting topics other than me ranting at you. So how about we talk about some themes? Because there's still a lot of stuff that Stephen King is good at. He's incredibly famous because he's good at so much stuff. So one theme I noticed was the theme of like cycles and cyclical motion of the world and life. So there's life and death and redoing and child and adult, and it's all connected. And what I'm saying is sometimes we end up where we started. And that's in the 2 timelines throughout the book. It's in Henry Bowers' story of becoming his own Frankenstein monster. It's in the 27-year cycle of it. It's all through. I mean, life is cyclical, and that's done really well and shown to us a bunch of times. There's the theme of belief. So belief is an interesting one. There's a line by It, as Victor, where it says to Henry that it can kill the kids if they half believe, which implies that a lack of belief or maybe a full belief leads to your death. Or maybe it's just a half belief. I think that's an interesting statement because it's so vague. It could mean so many things. And this is like, so if you look at the events, it's interesting because I feel like we could all come to different conclusions about belief. Because Eddie Corcoran dies not believing that this monster's killing him. He's like searching for a zipper on his suit. Patrick believes he's the only real person, and he dies because of it. Stanley kills himself because he thinks of it as real, like when he shut the album. So it's so interesting. I feel like we could come to the conclusion that this means you have to be in a state of half belief in order for it to feel like it can kill you or you can kill it. Or maybe you just have to either completely believe it's real, although I would assume it's not, because Eddie, who freaks out about that, and Stanley both die. I just think that's really interesting. King seems to just explore what belief does to you and doesn't give it many rules. It affects each character a little differently, and I like that, although it comes across a little haphazardly, but I like it because it means that there's room for argument and room for some sort of like understanding of what it is. I would say, my personal opinion, I would say that you have to have like, you can't fully believe that it's real in your world, maybe, because you start to lose your mind. So you have to like accept that it's there, but not accept it enough to let it live. Maybe that's like the thing. I don't know, but that's what I would come to, something like that. And their belief in themselves and their own killing techniques ultimately kills it. Another theme is like the forces. So there's a good force that propels them to do certain things, like the matches that are all unlit, even though Beverly lit one. And then there's like forgetting. There's also the force of it. And I think that force is a little bit murky too, because I think you could make an argument for what it does in the book. Because, I don't know, like it makes them barren, which is like an interesting force, so that they can't reproduce. But I think that the good force makes them forget. So which force do you think made them rich? Do you think it made them rich? Or do you think like the good force made them rich? I wonder who did that? Which force was it? You know, like it's interesting. You could try and talk about what force did what. And I think that it questions like what motivations there are. Because if it wanted them to come home, maybe he would make them rich so they can afford to come home. Or maybe the good force made them rich so that they wouldn't go home. I don't know. It's so interesting. I think the role of how these people are manipulated without realizing it and in what ways by whom is like a thing that I could talk about for ages. But yeah, it's just a good, interesting theme of them being manipulated and kind of put where they need to be. Another theme is fear. So the idea that kids have fear in a less complex way than humans, and so it's easier to exploit, is really interesting because I think that rings true. And the theme of what adulthood and childhood are and how they differ is very prominent. Often it occurs to the losers during emotional moments as they realize adults have less belief, a less fluid understanding of the world, less energy, and their fears are almost scarier than when you're a kid. Like when you're a kid, it's werewolves, but when you're an adult, it's like, I don't know, debt or something. Like even your fears are less like fun. So I thought the concept of fear and how it affects people was really interesting. The theme of friendship. So their power, their whole power of how they kill it lies in friendship. The warning that as long as they stay together, that they are protected and safe. Nearly each of them start this book kind of alone or like losing someone, and they come together through fate and protect each other through their bond. Interestingly enough, this friendship fades from their memory, which I think belies that message a little, but friendship still gives them power in the story. The power of it, the power to understand something may be going wrong with another, the power over it is what I mean to say. The power to understand that something may be going wrong with another member of the group, the power to lend power, the power to create promises and bonds. The power of friendship also implies that family, because it's problematic for many of the losers, your friends can be your chosen family. This struck me especially when Ben decided to melt his father's silver dollar for his friends because he said he didn't know his father. So along with like Beverly Marsh's family, Eddie's mom, problematic parents, it comes along with the line that like you have a chosen family and they are your friends, and friendship has power, and they can give you power that ends up scaring their parents a little bit because their parents sense that their children have more power when they're all together, which I thought was really interesting. Another theme is memory. Stephen King operates memory as a tool of healing, which was very cool. For each of the losers, they forget the events because it's like safer for them to move on and to leave it in the past. I will say that while memory is a useful storytelling tool, since they forgot the first time, I assumed after actually killing it that they might remember now, since before they didn't actually kill it. It was surprising to me to know that memory that forgetting happens the same way both times, despite the different circumstances. It makes me wonder what's causing the forgetting. But the only difference is that Mike starts to forget too, which implies that he no longer needs to remember. And so I wonder if it was it or a good force that made him remember then, or if memory is actually controlled by the losers themselves rather than an outside force. It makes me wonder how their memories are working. But I think that you could make any number of arguments for who caused this memory lapse, for if it was their own work, if it's just the way of the world. I don't know. I think it's interesting. Another theme, another way this book utilizes cool things is myth and legend. So this book really dives into myths and legends, and that's really obvious to me in the interludes especially. And they're the ones that scare children. There's the chewed, there's the black spot, the smoke hole, urban myths, the standpipe, scary places around town. The kissing bridge where Adrian Mellon died. Urban legends hold the most sway over children since they believe in them. So it isn't surprising to me that it hangs around the places where children are the most frightened, or that children believe something scary here happened, And it's because of this belief and these urban legends that there's silver slugs, and the chewed worked too, because those are also urban legends that silver can kill a werewolf. And that is what myths and legends tell them. And so the myths and legends seem to have actual sway in our physical world, which I think was such a fun concept, that the places that we think are haunted become haunted because we think of them that way. And the things that we think will defeat the monsters defeat them because we believe they will. I thought that was a cool way to write. And there's a lot more too. There are themes of time. There's themes of water and rain as both purifying and toxic. There's a theme of whatever they hold dear as a protecting force. So Stan's birds, Bill's ability to speak, Richie's ability with the voices, their own accomplishments and what they're proud of saves them many times. So while this book wasn't my favorite, there were some things that I really did enjoy. So here's something that I really liked. I really liked that Bill stuttered and was still the leader of the group. It's nice to see a boy with a stutter be someone his friends look up to. That's a nice message. And that was in 1985. That's a really cool, choice to make. When he was first writing, I was like, oh, Ben will be the leader. And then he made Bill the leader. And I was like, but he has a stutter. And I was like, well, that doesn't matter. That's so cool that he has a stutter and all his friends look up to him. That doesn't affect anything other than how he speaks. So I just thought that was really cool. I liked the relationships that were forged in the kiln of childhood. I feel like King is able to capture the childlike ability for laughter and fun, and there are many really heartwarming moments between the kids that recalled my own nostalgia and early friendships. For example, I really liked the rock fight when they fight with Mike all together and they protect him. And then Mike comes the day afterwards and they ask him fun questions and they kind of just accept him into the group. The ability to make and accept new friends was really adorable. There's lots of small scenes where, they want into the clubhouse and Bill pretends to be a monster on top of the door and they all laugh. The childhood ability to have imagination and to mess with your friends and not be embarrassed by things like that is very adorable. I think he really captured that essence of coming of age. And yeah, I'm going to talk about that in a second, but of childhood and I don't know, that ability. And so I liked too that we had a metaphysical antagonist, but there was also physical ones. For example, Henry Bowers. I think Henry's descent into madness and that wild gleam in his eye was one of the scariest parts of the book, because in that fight, it does seem impossible. How do little kids fight something bigger than them? The idea of the bully, of defeating the bully, felt really accurate for childhood and really right as something that the losers had to deal with and overcome. The chapters with Henry Bowers were really upsetting and but gripping. I was so interested. And I think King does a good job of making me feel bad for characters like Henry, like Tom and Beverly's father, by showing me their weaknesses and where they've been manipulated. I do think that personally, I think it was odd to send Tom to Derry just to kill him and not have Beverly overcome him herself. But in general, I like that there are physical threats that the losers had to tangle with, because it gives them a leg in the physical world and a leg in the metaphysical world, and I think it kept the book grounded and it kept it interesting for me. Henry Bowers was very scary. I did not like him. He was very spooky. Lastly, I think that this is a really good coming of age book. So, like I said, our first season's coming of age books, and this book is perfect for that because this could be like it really could be a very long allegory for coming of age and realizing that you are no longer kids, that something has been taken from you, how to fight off the terror of what's in your past, how to fight from evil and choose good. Like, these kids are sort of ripped from their childhood in every way, including a sexual awakening, before they are brought back, and it all has to happen again. They forget. It's almost like a coming of age story, but it happens twice because they forgot the first time. It didn't work. It's almost like it didn't work correctly. They didn't fully come of age yet. So they had to wait until they were a little bit older, and then they fully came of age. And like, if you think of it that way, this story has so many other layers to it. Like the fact that the kids, when they're older after defeating it for the second time, they all look older. And that's because they came of age again. Like, they finally left their whole childhood behind them. They're never coming back to it. It's almost like with that promise that they held on to a small bit of their childhood, and that kept them successful and kept them going. And when they came back, they had to let go of it in order to move on, and they had to kill that part of themselves. And so it's so interesting. I think that you could really go into this as being like a really big allegory for like coming of age stories. I'm really interested. I'd like write an essay on that. That sounds fun. But yeah, I think it was really well done. I really enjoyed the reading of coming of age, and it does put some things into perspective. Like, it makes more sense about their sexual awakenings. I still think that it was just maybe a step too far for me, but for example, their second, when they're older, like Beverly and Bill have their own sexual awakening again. So it's interesting. I think it's well done. I think that it's definitely a coming of age story, and I think it's different coming of age story than any other one I've ever read, because in other books, you only come of age once. And in this book, I think that they have to go through it all again because they didn't do it right the first time. And I think that is such an interesting concept, an idea for a story. So anyway, I think that that's all I've got to say. I know that I talked at you forever. I just had so many thoughts. I didn't even get to them all. I just didn't have time. But I am just so happy that I got to share all my thoughts with you. I promise that if you liked it, I totally get why. It was a very good story. It just wasn't for me. You just have to remember too, I'm not a big horror reader in general, so this was out of my comfort zone, but there's still some things that I thought he did very well because he is a very accomplished writer. So don't be too sad that I didn't like it, because it definitely makes sense to me why people would. I hope that you guys have the best Halloween, and I will see you next week for our book on Sing Unburied Sing. I am super excited for that one. So that book is so good. It'll be a reread for me, and I can't wait to talk about it. But I hope you guys have a happy Halloween. If you want more Bad Book Club, you can follow us on our social media at Bad Book Club Pod. If you can, please subscribe and review to the podcast. It helps me so much. Leave a little Halloween message saying that you liked it or something. I love reading your reviews. They make me so happy. And if you want to support the podcast, if you're in a generous Halloween mood, you can go and you could buy maybe some merchandise or one of the books that we've talked about and read it yourself. And then you can email me and say that you thought it was amazing and that I'm definitely wrong. But anyway, I really enjoyed talking to you guys. I appreciate you letting me tell you my opinions about books and letting me talk to you about books that I've read. It's just fun for me. So I hope that you guys have a very spooky Halloween. Goodbye, lovely.